is just a few slides, funnily enough, that I've done for somebody recently, which gives a big overview, well, a fairly good overview of what I'm doing in terms of anti-racist practice in my local authority, thinking about safe spaces, thinking about working with Black and global majority children, families and communities that we serve, as well as thinking about allyship, which is roughly, I think, an overview of what Neil has asked me to sort of talk about. So in terms of my role, I'll just kind of give a quick overview in terms of these slides rather than going into any major detail. I kind of act very much as a consultant, I suppose, to the local authority in terms of providing case formulations and consultations to social workers, to managers, and multi-agency partners sometimes when I am facilitating meetings, I suppose, about issues where there may be concerns about how to engage in conversations with children, with families who may be from Black, minoritized and global majority backgrounds. And it could be anything and everything relating to how they can incorporate ethnicity, diversity, how young people may identify, how we may talk to children, particularly children of mixed heritage who may identify as white, yet when they get to secondary school, they may experience racist bullying. So things like that, as well as how to think about thinking about different customs, traditions, different parenting styles, if you like, within social work assessments and court reports. And really overall, I suppose it's just growing people's confidence and ability really to have conversations sometimes that they feel are uncomfortable, particularly when working with people who are different from themselves and who may have different religions, as I said, and different parenting styles, which are different to our Eurocentric models and expectations really around how we parent. And in the mix of that, getting people to really think about, are we really listening to children, families, adults and the communities we serve when we are trying to do our assessments and the work we do, or are we trying to just make sure everyone fits into our white Eurocentric boxes and our boxes that we're so used to completing, because social work generally is a white Eurocentric concept in many ways, white European concept, which in some parts of the world and in some communities that we work with, particularly from abroad, they don't have social care. So it's also about how we break things down for people to really understand. Also to deliver training. Now, a lot of the training I deliver is within children's services, but as Neil's kind of touched on, I suppose the demand has become great in terms of offering training and support to other local authorities, other organisations as well, looking at all sorts of stuff from anti-racist practice generally within practice, working with Black dads, stereotypes, forced marriage, and also presently looking at undertaking a multi-agency conference with our police, health and education partners, particularly to look at the overrepresentation of Black and global majority children, families and people within those systems, and how we can do better. And I suppose the other thing, which I'll talk a little bit more about as we progress, but not spend a major amount of time on it because you might have questions about it. Another big thing I do is very much facilitate safe spaces for there to be uncomfortable conversations about race and racism, where people weekly, I will do a session every week. Some people think that's quite a lot, but it's kind of working for us, and it gives people the opportunity to really reflect and think about anti-racist practice in their practice with the children, families and communities that they are serving. So I have weekly anti-racist discussion spaces which I facilitate, which are as safe as they can be for everybody in children's services. If everybody came to the space, there'd be just under 500 staff members, and it isn't just for social workers. Everybody in children's services are invited to that space, from our senior leaders right through to our business support officers. So often in the Monday group in particular, people can bring anything and anything. So often on a Monday, I don't know what's coming my way. So it could be anything, you know, relating to, I don't know, something that may be going on within the community. You know, recently we've had discussions and reflections and dilemmas in terms of looking at Chris Cabba's death, I suppose, and colonialism and empire, right through to working with Black dads, as well as looking at issues around adultification, which is where children, particularly Black boys and girls, are treated more adult-like than their white peers. So we have a range of discussions around lots of different things, and some of those discussions also feed into our themed anti-racist discussion groups, which are every 6 weeks, where the Monday group is a drop-in so people can bring any practice issues, any cases, any families, any young people they wish to discuss, and unpick and reflect in a wider group. So I try not to give everybody the answers, because I very much feel it is a learning space for everybody to learn from each other. And yes, maybe towards the end of the session, I may give some thoughts and feedback about how things can be progressed, you know, when we're talking about race and racism and working with difference, I suppose, in that space. And the themed anti-racist discussion space, which is every 6 weeks, is a specific space where I'll think of a specific theme. And that makes it kind of a bit easier for people to a certain degree, in that they don't have to bring things and work so hard reflecting and thinking about stuff, even though they still do to a certain degree. But I make it a little bit easier by bringing a topic into that space, like stereotypes, like perceptions of Black youth and knife crime, for instance, you know, offering people a challenge recently in that space. We had a really good reflective discussion following a short video I showed about why social workers wouldn't stop to help a Black youth who had been stabbed through no fault of their own, but would stop if it was a white young person. And we unpicked that a little bit in terms of getting people to think about, well, why was it you would stop for a white young person, child that got stabbed, but not a Black person? And that was quite an interesting discussion, because the whole idea is to get people to reflect and think about their beliefs, really, in the mix of all of this, as well as how some of people's views and biases are also compounded and fed, if you like, by the media on a daily basis, whether it be on the news or social media. So, you know, lots of interesting discussions we have in those safe spaces, as safe as we can make them. And we also have another space, because it can also be a challenge for Black and global majority workers in this space. So we have a separate space, a monthly support group for Black and global majority staff members, where they can actually come and talk about any of their lived experiences, any challenges they may be experiencing within their pods, within their teams, or just have a peer-on-peer space where people can talk and support each other. So that's also been important, because although the safe spaces are for everybody in the Monday groups, which I facilitate, as well as the themed anti-racist discussion spaces, some of it can take its toll, if you like, on Black and global majority workers who have lived experiences of racism and some of the issues we discuss. And it can be tiring and really difficult for people to be in those spaces all of the time, even though we still encourage them to come to those spaces. So it's just ensuring that we have a space as well where we can seek support from each other, as well as us thinking about any issues and challenges that there may be, and some of which, within my role, I can then feed up to senior management to think about how we can then sometimes affect change within some of the issues that may be raised, which is particularly another part of my role. It's to look at enhancing practice overall within children's services and the wider council to a certain degree, but also how we improve the situation and lives of our Black and global majority staff members within the local authority, particularly as it relates to development, retention and progression of our Black and global majority staff members. So I've touched on weekly anti-racist discussion groups, and really a big part of that is really making it very clear from people from the outset, really, that it's uncomfortable. So it's uncomfortable to have uncomfortable conversations about race. But what I'm asking people to do, and we are asking people to do, is sit with that discomfort, because from my perspective, it's very much a space where people can get it wrong so that they can get it right going forward with the children, families and communities that we are serving. So it's very much a space where everyone's learning and developing together as we enhance racist practice, really, about how we can work better. with the families that we are working with. And there's an expectation that all staff attend. So we have stopped short, I suppose, of making it mandatory by saying that each pod, each team, each manager has to put each of their social workers on a rota to attend at least once every 8 weeks. So each pod has 8 social workers, even though we're quite short-staffed at the moment. So not all pods are fully staffed at the moment, but I am aware that not just our local authority, but many other local authorities are having challenges with recruitment. But the idea is that each social worker in each pod comes at least once every 8 weeks if you have 8 social workers in a pod. That's not to say that those people who are really interested in the work and anti-racist practice can't come as well. So there could be more than one social worker from each team. But the reason for putting staff on the rota was we were finding that there were some staff members who weren't coming at all, who were very much feeling that, you know, they maybe didn't need to come. So this was to try and capture those people that weren't coming so that they could come on a rota basis. It's not perfect, but it's beginning to help a lot in terms of making sure everyone comes. And even if they don't talk straight away, which people don't always do, they come and listen, and then people grow in confidence, and then they may talk in 3 or 4, 5, 6 weeks time, which is often what I find. And people then feedback sometimes that they didn't feel comfortable at the beginning, but they feel sometimes after a period of time goes by that they feel more comfortable and that it's a safe space to actually talk. So yes, I also touched on the themed anti-racist discussion group. And I've written in this slide here, which you can't see, that some of the things we spoke about. I touched on identification and perceptions of Black youth and knife crime, but I have also shown videos and YouTube clips and then opened up a whole hour-long conversation around microaggressions, what they look like and how people feel about that. And tone policing in particular was a recent one we did, which looked at people's perceptions of Black women, Black men, in terms of them potentially speaking loud, or people perceiving them to be aggressive or dominant, and then making comparisons with white people who may also speak passionately, if you like, but their words used to describe them might be assertive and confident. So we talked a bit about tone policing for an hour. Most of our sessions are an hour or a little bit longer, which gets everyone to reflect on all of these issues. Now, I suppose it's probably important for me to also say I offer a lot of challenge. The local authority offers a lot of challenge, but I offer a lot of challenge in these facilitated groups because I am one of a few but growing Black and global majority staff members in a local authority that's predominantly white in terms of its social workforce, predominantly white in terms of its team managers. There's about 3 Black and Asian team managers, and very white, no diversity at all yet within the senior leadership team. So all of this offers a lot of challenge for our senior leaders right down to our business support workers, but it's working. I can begin to see the impact that I'm having, I suppose. So, which is a good thing, not to say that there's not an immense amount of work to do. We're at the beginning of the journey, and I don't very much feel that this is something we're going to fix overnight. And when we're talking about anti-racist practice, it's a lifelong journey from my perspective. But we're making progress little by little. I also have done some training for universities, BA and MA students in particular, around beginning to think about anti-racist practice for when they go out, not just on placement, but when they finish and go into local authorities in their ASYE year and beyond, around how they think about anti-racist practice, working with difference, working with diversity, working with different communities, and very much getting them to think about that as well through an intersectional lens, particularly when I give examples, for instance, like, you know, somebody who may be Black, who may be Muslim, who may identify as someone coming from the LGBTQ plus community, who may be unemployed, who may also in the mix of that have issues around immigration control. So when you actually look at all of these issues together, they can really compound people's experiences of racism, Islamophobia, people's views about immigration and asylum, all in the mix of that. And sometimes we can't look at race just in isolation. We have to look at all of those interconnecting, intersectional elements, really, in terms of how we help people who may feel oppressed and discriminated against, as well as experience racism. And I touched on earlier, I also provide some mentoring in terms of supporting our Black global majority staff members, particularly around how we develop our staff, how we retain our staff, and how we think about progression through training and through other bits and pieces we're doing. More recently, I organised one of our first Black and global majority away days, asking some very nice people to come and help, and they did. Chantel Thomas from BASWA, and another amazing woman I met, the Anti-Racist Strategic Lead from Hackney, and it was a real absolute success. And those are the sorts of things we're thinking about in terms of making our staff members feel valued as well, in the mix of it all. I've talked about the safe spaces, and the reason for those safe spaces really is for staff to feel listened to and heard who may have lived experience of racism, which I suppose was something they maybe didn't always feel that they had a space where they were listened to and heard prior to me joining the local authority. But now things are very much changing. It's not perfect, but they are feeling at least heard and listened to, and they've voiced some of the changes that they have seen over the past 2 years now since I've been in post. I also am part of an anti-racist project strategic board, where I actually also look at with the local authority as part of the strategic plans, how we are progressing those plans, so that it's not just a piece of paper where we have a load of actions on it. It's very much focused on each month. We meet and focus on how we've progressed that plan, and that plan as it relates to children and families, as it relates to our fostering service in terms of trying to recruit more Black global majority Muslim foster carers right now at the present moment in time. Thinking very much about how we can recruit more and retain more Black and global majority staff members. We are part of one of the 18 local authorities who are piloting the workforce race equality standards as a result of that. And in addition to all of that, it's how we engage better with our community, where there's been a lot of mistrust of social care, really, and social services, and people's perceptions of social care taking their children away or locking people up, or people, the overrepresentation of people in mental health is also Black people in mental health has also been something we've actually also discussed as well. So it's been important for me and others to engage with our communities, and that has been our Muslim communities, our Black communities, all of these communities where there's been crossovers with neurodiversity, our Gypsy Roma traveller community, women's groups, health, etc., as well as some groups I sit on quarterly, like harmful practices groups that looks at FGM, child abuse linked to faith and belief in particular, as well as our VORG, violence against women and girls group, and support for our asylum seeking team. Now, in terms of challenges and allyship, I would say some of the challenges for us, and we're very explicit in our local authority about what that is acknowledging that our families experience racism. And once we acknowledge that as a starting point, we can then think about how our staff members may very much perceive themselves as not racist, but how we move our staff members from being not racist to being anti-racist is very much our goal. And I suppose in terms of thinking about that, I ask people, I could say what allyship means, but what do people think allyship really means? Is it going on a march? This was a discussion I also had recently where up to 15,000 people marched in Brighton for Black Lives Matters 2 years later. It's as if the death of George Floyd and marching for Black Lives Matter was yesterday's news and yesterday's big thing to do, but not so much something people want to think about now. So I say to people, is allyship going on a big march and then thinking, oh, well, I've done my bit. I am protesting for Black lives, yet in their office spaces at home, they don't speak up. Because from my perspective, allyship isn't always speaking up for your Black and global majority staff members or colleagues or friends, or even family members for that matter. If people have got mixed family members, it's thinking about, well, how do you challenge injustice? How do you challenge things that you may hear, see, and observe? You know, is it just that march, or is it more than that? And how do we speak up in meetings? How do we deal with issues of racism, discrimination, and oppression that we hear about or we see? And part of the issue around allyship might be you might do nothing about that. You may go and say to somebody else, oh, well, I saw such and such happen today and it was absolutely terrible. That's not allyship. You may think it's terrible. Some people say, well, that's what I often say, and others say that's what I'm not racist people say. But anti-racist people will take that further. And if not able to challenge that as an individual, it's about what they do with that information to ensure that it doesn't get lost and that somebody else challenges it, or it's fed up to management or fed up to somebody else who might be able to do something about that. But allyship really is very much around what are we and you as individuals going to do about racism and injustice and things that you may hear, see and observe just generally. Really, I think of it as a multitude of things, and it's not just going on a march, is very much how I kind of think about it. So I think, well, what does that mean to you? And that's a quick whistle stop in terms of what I do, in terms of just trying to give you an overview of what I do, but a little snippet of some of the safe spaces that I kind of facilitate for Black and white staff and mixed staff all together as a group, and the themed spaces as well as a little snippet on allyship, really, I would say. But for me, I think allyship is a big word, really. It's a big word in terms of solidarity and how we actually think about working together as a group of people, really. What does solidarity and allyship really mean? Because I'm still asking that question. Where are those 15,000 people plus who marched in Brighton for Black Lives Matter now, 2 years on? That's kind of me. Open to questions.
Thank you, Millie. Yeah,
it's quite a lot there, and I'm conscious that, you know, I had a limited amount of time, but
I get that.
Open to questions, and I suppose, you know, the big part of what I do is enabling people to have those uncomfortable conversations and to be able to sit with that discomfort throughout all the sessions that I do.